The Dance of Dragons had come to an end, but the peace that followed remained fragile and violence continued. King Aegon III sat the Iron Throne, yet he was unable to rule without the guidance of his regents. Around him stood ambitious lords, royal counselors, and survivors of a war that had nearly destroyed House Targaryen. At the center of the king's regency was Lord Unwin Peake, the Hand of the King. Unwin had risen to power to become one of the most powerful men in all of Westeros, but his growing influence had made him enemies throughout the realm. Not that he cared, as he would set upon anyone who would get in his way. It was revealed that Unwin would attempt to marry his daughter, Mircalla Peake, to King Aegon. Such a marriage would place House Peake beside the Iron Throne and allow Unwin to maintain his influence even after the king's regency came to an end. Objections came from the other regents and many lords and ladies of the realm, and Unwin was forced to hear their demands. The other regents and lords of Westeros were unwilling to accept this without protest. To these complaints, the crown announced that a grand gathering would be held in King's Landing, the Maiden's Day Ball. While noble maidens traveled toward the capital, the Seven Kingdoms were already beginning to fracture. Disease spread through the north, wildlings gathered beyond the wall, the Westerlands prepared to reclaim Fair Isle from the Ironborn, a mysterious witch ruled from Harrenhal, rumors of a dragon being birthed inside the ancient castle also swirled, the mountains clans of the Vale stirred, and the entire realm shuddered and could barely stand. The dance had ended, but Westeros was far from at peace. By the order of King Aegon III, the noble houses of Westeros were invited to present their unmarried daughters, sisters, nieces, and other eligible women before the king. The crown described the ball as a celebration of peace and unity after years of war. The festivities would include music, dancing, feasting, and entertainment within the Red Keep. Officially, the king would be given the opportunity to meet the noble maidens of the realm and select one of them as his future queen. Unofficially, the event had been created to prevent Lord Unwin Peake from simply forcing his daughter upon the king. House Peake still possessed an enormous advantage. Mircalla already lived close to the royal court, while her father controlled much of the king's government. Furthermore, the daughter of Unwin had managed to meet with Aegon many times before the other maidens had managed to arrive. He had already taken quite a liking to her. However, the other great houses would still try to challenge him and his daughter, and to be clear, by no means was his daughter acting maliciously. She did care for Aegon. It was her father who held malicious intent. From across Westeros, noble families began to arrive in King's Landing. Among the women presented before the king were Patricia Redwine, Moira Blackwood, Jamila Rain, Fern Ashwood, Elspeth Lannister, Mulliane Westerling, Myrmidora Hayne, and Daenerys Valaryon. There were also many, many more ladies from across the realm. Each maiden carried the expectations of her family upon her shoulders. A royal marriage could transform the fortunes of an entire house. The family of Aegon's chosen queen would gain access to the royal court, future influence over the king, and a direct connection to the continuation of the Targaryen dynasty. Within the Red Keep, Vale and Rhaena Targaryen became increasingly concerned about Unwin Peake's ambitions. The sisters believed that allowing Mircalla to become queen would strengthen Unwin's control over Aegon. They began conspiring to place Daenerys Valaryon before the king, wanting her to be selected over the daughter of a man that they all despised. Daenerys possessed the blood of old Valyria, and came from one of the realm's most powerful naval families, the Velaryons. To Vale and Rhaena, she represented a far safer choice than the daughter of the Hand. She could also be easily controlled and placed in a position where the older women could influence her. Away from the public festivities, Mircalla Peake met with the king in private. The meeting was expected to be another example of Unwin attempting to push his daughter towards the throne. Instead, Aegon and Mircalla appeared to genuinely enjoy one another's company. The king, who had grown distant and withdrawn after the horrors of the dance, found himself comfortable around her. Whatever her father's ambitions might have been, Mircalla herself began forming a real connection with Aegon, forming a real sense of love, care for the king. During this time, Gaiman Palehair, friend of Aegon, also presented the king with a small gift, a cat named Echo. It was a simple moment, but one that provided Aegon with a rare source of comfort. While the lords of Westeros competed to control his marriage and his throne, Echo asked nothing of him. Echo was just a pure-hearted and caring cat that purred and sat upon his lap and distracted Aegon from the despair that he felt. The atmosphere of King's Landing began to darken as a result of Unwin and the maidens that began to arrive from across the realm. Vicious lies were spread about the maidens attending the ball. Rumors attacked their appearance, their families, and their reputations. The purpose was obvious. If a maiden could be disgraced before appearing before Aegon, she could be removed from consideration without ever threatening Mirielle's position. The rumors soon produced real violence as well. A maiden from House Swan was even killed in King's Landing. Fear spread among the visiting noble families, while unrest grew among the city's peoples. Fires broke out in Eel Alley as panic and anger swept through the streets. The presence of so many nobles, knights, and guards in rival households made the situation even worse. Every insult risked becoming a confrontation, and every confrontation threatened to become a riot. The maiden of House Swan was jumped in an alley in a plot set by Unwin when she arrived at the city. She ended up being killed by brigands in the streets. A Tully girl was poisoned, and while it was not a deadly poison, she couldn't stop soiling herself so badly that she couldn't leave her chamber pot in her room. Other girls had their faces damaged with attacks, or rumors were attempted to be spread, such as about the Lannister girls, that they had slept with other boys and didn't have their maiden heads. The viciousness of these rumors affected the girls and ruined the reputations of others. Eventually, knights belonging to House Hunter even killed civilians during the unrest after the Maiden's Day Ball completed. House Hunter rushed off into the city to find the criminals who had defiled one of the members of their household. The deaths caused an open riot in the capital. King Aegon was then eventually forced to confront these consequences after the Maiden's Day Ball. The knights responsible were arrested, forced to take the black, and sent to the Wall, removing them from the capital. Despite the murder, rumors, fires, and riots, the Maiden's Day Ball eventually continued. The noble women of Westeros appeared before the king one after another. Their families watched closely, hoping to see some sign of interest from Aegon. Vale and Rhaena continued to support Daenerys, Unwin continued to favor his daughter, but when the king finally made his decision, he chose Mirielle Peake, which shocked the realm and created massive amounts of outrage as they viewed him as a weak-willed puppet of Unwin. Aegon's sisters even confronted him over the choice. They feared that the marriage would give Unwin exactly what he wanted from the beginning. Yet Aegon refused to change his decision. Although Unwin had certainly created the circumstances that brought Mirielle before the king, Aegon's choice had appeared to be his own. The two had formed a bond with each other that could not be dismissed as merely another scheme of the regency. Aegon and Mirielle were married, making the daughter of Unwin Peake the new queen of the Seven Kingdoms. For Lord Unwin, it was a tremendous political victory. His daughter now sat beside the king, and House Peake had been tied directly to the Iron Throne. He had essentially won. However, the marriage did not solve the tensions surrounding Aegon's regency. The king continued to grow older, bringing him closer to the day that he could rule without his counselors. New figures were also entering the royal court. Torrhen Manderly managed to secure a position as Master of Coin, despite the protests of Unwin Peake, gaining influence over the finances of the realm. The Maiden's Day Ball had concluded, but the rest of the realm had been turning and spinning even while the city was caught up in its own world. While the court prepared for the Maiden's Day Ball, Alyn Valaryon traveled the seas, away from his wife southward, once more through the Stepstones. He needed safe passage through the islands to reach the Iron Islands. He reached the Stepstones, which were unpredictable as the eccentric pirate king Recalio Rindoon had established his power there, when the pirate king was allied with the Braavosi. Alyn confronted Recalio, and the two of them spoke over a feast. They threatened and bargained with one another, but by the end of the night Recalio and Alyn had slept together, and Alyn had slept with his wife. After they spent the evening with one another, a deal was made to raid the city of Tyrosh, destroy their fleet, and plunder the city for its gold. In exchange, Recalio would become an ally of Alyn and not tax the ships of Westeros. Together, their fleets destroyed the Tyroshi naval force and successfully raided the city. The victory strengthened Recalio's control over the Stepstones and increased Alyn's reputation as one of the greatest naval commanders in Westeros. Elsewhere in Essos, the Rogare family attempted to secure allies in Myr and Pentos. Their efforts failed, though, as neither of them wished to involve themselves in the Stepstones or fight against the Braavosi or Alyn Valaryon. Myr also desired to take lands from the Lyseni in the disputed lands. Neither city was willing to support them in any capacity, leaving the Rogares increasingly isolated despite their wealth and influence. After the fighting in the Stepstones and Tyrosh, Alyn traveled to Dorne, and from Dorne, Alyn traveled to Old Town, and later he reached Lannisport, where he aided Johanna Lannister and sunk the Iron Fleet, and aided the Lannisters in recapturing Fair Isle, adding to his numerous accomplishments and prestigious victories. His greatest mission, however, took him to Lys on his return. There, he located Prince Viserys Targaryen, the younger brother of King Aegon III. Viserys had been missing since the Dance of the Dragons, and many in Westeros believed him to be dead. Instead, he had survived in Lys and had taken a wife. Alyn brought Viserys and his wife safely back to Westeros after making a deal with the Rogares. The prince's return was one of the greatest victories of Aegon's young reign and of Alyn Velaryon's achievements. After losing nearly his entire family during the dance, the king had regained his long-lost brother. Alyn was celebrated in King's Landing as a hero. Mircalla Rindoon, meanwhile, crowned himself as king of the Stepstones. He then attempted to establish relations with Dorne, but his messenger was brutally rejected as his hand was cut off by Alyn. Alyn's voyages had changed the balance throughout Westeros and Essos. The question of who would succeed Lady Jane had divided the Vale. Jane had never married and had no children. Several members of House Arryn possessed claims to the Eyrie, but two men stood at the center of this coming conflict, while a third lingered at the periphery and looked for opportunities. Joffrey Arryn had been named as Jane's chosen heir, while he wasn't directly in line to inherit. Eldrick Arryn possessed his own claim, and he was the rightful heir by succession through his father, Arnold Arryn the Mad, who is currently imprisoned by Lady Jane Arryn in the Sky Cells. He was supported mainly by Lord Gunther Royce and Sir Dennis Templeton. Then on the periphery was Isambard Arryn, known for his wealth and influence in Goldtown, also believed that he should inherit the Vale. He believed that his claim was more tied to his capability, and that he was more prepared to lead the Vale into a prosperous future than the other two. Gunther Royce was the first to act openly and treasonously on behalf of Eldrick. He began sending letters across the Vale, attempting to gather support for Eldrick, even though Lady Jane was healthy and not near death. The plan was premature, and Houses Belmore and Hunter revealed the conspiracy to Lady Jane swiftly. Gunther then sent an ultimatum to Lady Jane, demanding concessions for Eldrick and his supporters, wanting her to name Eldrick as her heir immediately. Lady Jane obviously refused. The dispute became bloody during the gathering at Runestone hosted by Lord Gunther. There, Sir Eldrick Arryn and Lord Cretan Redfort exchanged insults against one another and their families. The confrontation ended in a duel with Eldrick killing Lord Redfort. The death made reconciliation between the competing factions even less likely, and before Jane could fully respond to the Royce conspiracy and Eldrick's actions, another crisis struck the Vale when Lady Karaya Arryn was captured by mountain clansmen during her trip back to Strongsong from the Eyrie, as she was heading back to meet with her husband and children once more. The abduction temporarily forced the feuding knights of the Vale to turn their attention towards a common enemy. Lady Jane summoned her forces and named Lord Quentin Corbray the commander of her armies, and he was sent in to recover Karaya and take revenge against the mountain clansmen. At the same time, members of House Templeton, led by Sir Dennis Templeton, attempted to convince Joffrey Arryn to surrender his claim to the Eyrie and to name Eldrick as the proper heir. Joffrey, after a long conversation, refused to accept, and he decided instead that he would speak with Eldrick and try to convince him that there was peaceful resolutions to find in the Vale that they could all be happy with after Lady Jane would eventually pass away in the future. Karaya was eventually rescued. Sir Dennis Templeton lost his leg in an engagement with the mountain clansmen, and Joffrey Arryn remained back with him to treat him afterwards, and some other Valemen died violently. Though they had managed to save Karaya, and the victory was rather absolute as the mountain clansmen were destroyed and their heads put on pikes. Karaya was returned to her husband in Song, and the Valemen were satisfied that the mountain clans had learned their place, at least for now. With the clans defeated, the political struggle in the Vale resumed. Eldrick Arryn married Olenna Royce while the clans fought the Valemen, strengthening his connection to Gunther and House Royce. However, there were many complications in the creation of this marriage, as Gunther and Eldrick were seemingly bickering and arguing about a great many things happening. Meanwhile, Isambard Arryn began conspiring with House Grafton. Gulltown's wealth and access to the sea gave Isambard's resources that neither Joffrey nor Eldrick could easily match. Once he officially had Grafton's support, he put his plan into motion. Isambard sent his son, Edmund Arryn, to King's Landing. Edmund met with Lord Unwin Peake and asked the Hand to recognize Isambard as the rightful heir to the Vale. All of this transpiring near the end of the Maiden's Day ball. He considered it, and eventually Unwin accepted. He would eventually push for Lady Jane to name Isambard the heir to the Vale by force. It would remove one of his rivals, but he didn't need to force her hand. Lady Jane was suddenly struck with a sweating sickness and died in the arms of her lover, Jessamine Redfort. The death was sudden and shocking, and the Lady of the Vale, who once held control over it and led her people through the dance, had been struck down so suddenly by an illness. House Hunter immediately accused Gunther Royce of poisoning her, suggesting that Jane's death had been arranged to clear the way for Eldrick. While Eldrick and the Royces denied such had transpired, they didn't wait either. Eldrick declared himself the new Lord of the Vale from Runestone and demanded the other Lords of the Vale accept him as such. Joffrey Arryn attempted to prevent the Vale from descending into civil war when he called for peace with his rival claimant and tried to settle the succession peacefully. It destroyed his claims in the Vale, as many, such as House Hunter and Belmore, saw it as weak. Lord Corbray began marching against Gunther Royce and Eldrick's supporters. Lord Unwin Peake then made the crown's positions known. Unwin Peake declared Isambard Arryn the rightful Lord of the Vale. He took the coin from the capital and pooled it together with Isambard and hired mercenaries from Essos and transported them to the Vale. Thousands of mercenaries. Mercenaries from the Second Sons, the Brave Companions, and the Company of the Cat, and many smaller companies that were all placed under Unwin Peake's intimidating underling, Tissario the Tiger, who was told to go to the Vale and win this conflict for Isambard, so that Unwin would have a powerful ally in the Lord Paramountcy of the Vale. Among those mercenaries were Zorse riders, men who rode zebra-like creatures, men who adorned themselves with feathers, Dornishmen, and many other strange fighters from strange lands, foreign soldiers, who soon demonstrated that they had little loyalty to the people of the Vale. They only had loyalty to the coin that they had been paid with, and they showed up with a great amount of men, vicious and ready for conflict. During an ambush against the Corbray forces, the mercenaries killed several Valemen, while Quentin Corbray had managed to kill the son of Isambard, Peter Arryn, who was with the mercenaries in the first battle of the Vale Civil War. The use of foreign soldiers angered many lords, but with Isambard's wealth, it allowed him to continue gathering strength. House Hunter met with Joffrey, but left dissatisfied after their previous discussion of his weakness. They marched towards Gulltown, where they eventually intended to declare for Isambard, once Isambard had made the promises that to raise House Hunter into a more prestigious position in the Vale. House Belmore attempted to negotiate their neutrality with Isambard, but failed to do so. Joffrey now knew that he could no longer wait, and assembled his men for war. Eldrick Arryn met the massive mercenary army in the field of battle outside of Gulltown. Thousands of Royce soldiers and Valemen, led by Eldrick, would fight Tissario the Tiger and his associate mercenaries, House Grafton and the loyal men of Isambard from the port of Arryn. The battle was vicious, but the mercenaries proved to be a tougher opponent. Tissario the Tiger even found Eldrick in the field of battle, and the both of them engaged in a duel that only lasted 20 seconds. It ended when Tissario cut off the head of Eldrick with one stroke, winning the battle and ending one side of the Civil War in one fell swoop. While Eldrick's father, Arnold, was the apparent claimant, and he was still being held in the Eyrie, no longer imprisoned, and more so allowed to wander the Eyrie under house arrest, previously imprisoned by Lady Jane. He had gone mad, and no one was seriously fighting for him. With his son dead, Eldrick's side turned surprisingly to Joffrey, and many declared for him in order to fight against his foreign mercenaries. They met in the valley and fields between Red Fort, Nine Stars, and Old Anchor, where battles after battles have been fought, over and over again. Joffrey Arryn managed to find smaller engagements where he managed to be victorious, but the mercenary army, coupled with the hunters and Graftons, were far too large and difficult to deal with. Thankfully, Tessario the Tiger had been killed in one of the engagements, filled with arrows by the Arryns. Eventually, Joffrey was forced to retreat to the Eyrie with a shattered and broken army as he considered terms for peace. The peace came even more bluntly when thousands of men with Targaryen shields had arrived in Goldtown, finding themselves surrounding Nine Stars in a siege. As the siege continued, Joffrey met with Isambard and the Crown. A deal was struck that Joffrey and Eldric's children would be spared from the wall or execution. They would be able to freely live their lives as they please and would not even be placed under house arrest. They all simply need to renounce their claims to the Eyrie and swear fealty to Isambard, and all would be forgiven. The war ended on these terms, though one more life was taken, as Sir Dennis Templeton refused to bend the knee to Isambard, even after the long siege. But instead of putting his men through a siege that would result in all of their deaths, he instead asked to be executed by Isambard's men. They did so. Isambard then married one of his sons to the cousin of Unwin Peak, and Unwin Peak was victorious once more, as Isambard was now the Lord of the Vale and a loyal ally. The Belmores, Herseys, and many others had lost many sons in this war, but now it was over, and Isambard sat as Lord of the Vale. The mercenaries had been brutal, vicious, and violent beyond all measure, and even Isambard, who was a compassionate but ambitious man, found his stomach turning from the sight. Their army was still large and massive, and before they departed they took Goldtown hostage, demanding payment of gold. The Crown, Isambard, and the Graftons accepted, and they received another payment before they departed the Vale. The Ironborn occupation of Fair Isle had become an unbearable humiliation for the Westerlands. Lady Johanna Lannister called the Banners of the West, demanding that her lords join her in reclaiming the island. Crester, Rain, Westerling, and many more answered the call. Fair Isle was not merely a location that needed to be retaken. Members of House Farman had been captured while Dalton Greyjoy's forces continued to threaten the western coasts. Farman has been actively tortured, and Johanna's own daughters were taken during the sacking of Lannisport by the Ironborn and brought to that island. The lords of the Westerlands agreed to support Johanna and planned how they would get to the island of Fair Isle while the Iron Fleet remained anchored in harbor. A large coalition began to form. Alyn Valaryon eventually brought his ships, and Recalio Rendoon contributed pirate ships from the Stepstones to assist him as well. House Mallister sent forces from the Riverlands, the Fossaways sent forces from the Breach. Sir Ulrich Dane even joined the campaign as an individual. However, when Ulrich was there, he was in a disguise of sorts, and didn't announce himself publicly as a Dane, but it became more and more obvious whenever he would pull forth his unique sword. Together, this alliance attacked the Ironborn who were holding Fair Isle. Before the battle began, a plan was started by the Farmans and Lannisters in order to free Joanne Lannister, and the Farmans and the many children and women and other peoples who were imprisoned in the castle. Joanne Lannister received the message of the mission and accepted that she would be the one to try to lead the peoples out. But before she would lead them out, she brought the Salt Wives of Dalton together, who had been assaulted by the Ironborn Lord for weeks. They attacked Dalton. They stabbed him repeatedly until he was dead, and then fled Fair Isle with Garren Farman. Sadly for Garren, he needed to remain back and protect the women and children as they escaped. He died in the following battle, sacrificing himself so that they could live. They had failed to take the castle, but the battle was not done. His death removed one of the most dangerous men in Westeros. Dalton Greyjoy was gone, and the Ironborn were leaderless. Alyn Valaryon saved Joanne Lannister as she traveled back to the west, and then after meeting with the Lannisters, he fought the Iron Fleet. Alyn killed Loren Greyjoy as he boarded his ship. Loren had taken up Nightfall from the dead Dalton. Sadly, the sword was knocked off the boat during the fighting and lost in the waves. Alyn destroyed the Iron Fleet with his pirate allies, while the Lannisters, Brax, Rains, Ulrich Dane, and the rest of the Westerlands, the Mallisters, and the Fossaways fought the Ironborn and retook the island of Fair Isle. Johanna Lannister even slayed an Ironborn lord in combat with her spear. The Ironborn still occupied the castle of Fair Isle after the failed attempt to take it earlier by the Farman in a surprise attack. Johanna Lannister promised that they would be allowed to leave the castle and return to their islands. When they left the castle, Johanna Lannister cut each and every one of them down and killed them. Johanna Lannister then announced that the campaign would not end there, that the forces had liberated Fair Isle. They would now turn to the Iron Islands themselves. Johanna and her forces went to the Iron Islands, and they did battle on the islands of Pike and Orkmont, putting heads on pikes and taking revenge against the Ironborn, who had did such terrible things to the Westerlands during and after the Dance of Dragons. Johanna herself oversaw the destruction and pillaging of the islands until the message was sent. During the invasion of the islands, it was made even easier, as 5 different claimants did battle with one another, trying to claim the title of Lord Reaper after the death of Dalton. They were too stubborn to make peace with one another and defend themselves against the Lannisters, as all of them wanted the claim and none of them were willing to reconcile with the other. So Johanna dealt with them individually one by one, and almost none of them were standing by the end of it. As she was returning back to the Westerlands, however, she contracted an illness which lingered with her for some time. The Westerlands had avenged the defiled and fallen, but in truth, it did not fill the void that was left from it. Joanne Lannister and Ulrich Dane during this time had gotten closer together, and Ulrich took her back with him to Starfall to be his new wife, despite her already being married to a Fossilway. No longer tortured by Dalton, she was free to make her own choices now, and she left with Ulrich to Dorne. While Southern lords fought over marriages and succession, the North faced a quieter but equally dangerous enemy. Winter fever spread through the region, Barrowton was brought to its knees, and even White Harbor suffered. So much so that the absence of Torrhen Manderly in the city was felt, as it had become filled with unrest and disease, and he would eventually likely need to return back to his family's seat to regain control over the situation. Lord Cregan Stark traveled across his lands but avoided the areas most heavily affected by the sickness, treating with his lords and listening to their worries and trying to discover what he could do for them as Lord of Winterfell, while he also dealt with his own family members plotting and scheming and possibly trying to take the seat of Winterfell from him. At the Wall, the Night's Watch faced an ever-present threat of the wildlings that lingered beyond the Wall. Silas the Grim, a king beyond the Wall, had assembled a mighty force of wildlings and was threatening to attack. A great ranging was announced, and the Night's Watch, along with Northern Mountain clansmen, went beyond the Wall. They were unsuccessful in their attempt to weaken the wildlings and kill their leader, which then turned the Night's Watch to asking the Northern Lords to come and aid them against the eventual coming wildling attack. House Umber sent assistance, providing men and supplies to help defend the realm. They were eager to kill wildlings, and the Northern Mountain clans began to collect their bannermen for when Silas Grim would eventually attack. The North had avoided the political chaos that was spreading through the South. While some maidens, such as the daughter of Lord Bolton, had gone south, the majority of the threats and going-ons in the north came from beyond the Wall and the sickness that plagued the land. Cregan couldn't afford to look south while his own family looked at his seat. Princess Elyandra hosted a great feast, attended by nobles and warriors from across Dorne. Sir Ulrich Dane had promised to attend, while the arrival of Alyn Valaryon brought one of the Westeros' most famous naval captains to the Dornish court, especially after his victory against Tyrosh and aiding Mircalla Rendune. Alyn was young and beautiful. Elyandra was equally young and beautiful. The both of them became very close with one another during his visit in Sunspear. While both of them enjoyed each other's company physically, it blossomed and bloomed into true feelings for one another. Sadly, those feelings would have to be put to the side, for one man had already married, and, as Princess of Dorne, many would never accept Alyn. Eventually, he'd have to leave, as Dorne found itself dealing with a predicament, and he needed to head west to deal with the Ironborn. Dorne raiders began to cross into the Reach and Stormlands. The Wills crossed into the lands of the Dundarians, while the Tarleys crossed into the lands of the Blackmont. The Ironwoods had even managed to intimidate the Dundarians into aiding them with information and spying. The new Lady of the Stormlands and the region of the Reach were not keen on conflict, but when conflict came to their doorstep, it was unavoidable. Elyandra, after her love Alyn had left, she had to face these troubles head-on, taking on the new responsibility. But also, a new face arrived, Drazinko Rogaire. Drazinko had won the heart of Elyandra. The man had managed to convince Elyandra to marry him, and marry they did. When Alyn returned from his time in the Westerlands, he dealt with Drazinko and the Lyseni, who revealed that they had Viserys Targaryen, and that he was on the Island of Lys. Alyn made a deal with the Lyseni and then departed for King's Landing after a short discussion with Alejandra, trying to convince her not to marry Drazinka. Viserys and his new wife, Rogare wife, were brought to King's Landing, while Dorne prepared for a possible conflict with the Iron Throne. Alice Rivers, known to many as the Witch Queen, occupied Harrenhal. Her and her broken men used the castle as a holding for their own desires and ambitions. She was believed to have the power to curse men and even kill them with her magical abilities. Worse still, she had a son named Quentin, and rumors swirled of her having a dragon. While those outside the enormous ruined castle would not know, and only heard whispers, it was indeed true. Alice had given birth to a son of Aemond, and a dragon had been born beside him, Midnight, a purple and black beast that curled beside Quentin in his cradle within the ruined castle. Kermit Tully had been assigned by the crown to solve the issue of Harrenhal, and after many spies and mercenaries and other lords had been sent and failed, he was chosen as the Lord Paramount to solve it. Before he could depart and deal with it directly, a conflict had begun between the Blackwoods and the Brackens, one that had sparked into a war so suddenly. The conflict had been orchestrated by Alice and her broken men to give time to avoid any confrontation with the Crown or the Tullys. Alice needed time. The best way to do it was to get the Blackwoods and the Brackens to kill one another. Bloody Ben and Otho Bracken met in the field of battle while Kermit told them to cease their violence. Battles were fought all around the Teats, a pair of hills on the Blackwood but Bracken-owned side of the river. Many men fell in battle, and Bloody Ben himself even lost an arm in the fighting. Kermit eventually brought his army forth and ended the conflict, but neither had been punished outright for their actions. It had done its job of delaying and causing time to pass so that Alice would be more prepared for her confrontation with Kermit. Kermit, after some time, then met with Alice, and she explained her position and said that she would be a loyal vassal of the Tullys if he were just to accept her. She left out the information about the dragon, and Kermit accepted. He wrote to the crown, informing them that there was nothing foul taking place, and that she should be allowed to keep the castle of Harrenhal. For it was a ruin. Allow her to occupy it, and when her line ends, it can be given to someone else. The Mallisters avoided the conflicts going on between the Brackens and the Blackwoods. They instead went to the Iron Isles and fought on Fair Isle with the Westerlands. Known for hating the Ironborn, they jumped at the chance to destroy their island and participate in defeating the Ironborn in battle. Samwell the Eagle Mallister proved himself in battle and fought well against them, while Lord Waylon Frey decided to take a more peaceful and relaxed approach. He avoided the fighting altogether and decided to host hunts, feasts, and get-togethers, spreading his good name throughout the Riverlands. Kermit Tully struggled to control his lords, but he had managed to find some semblance of normalcy after the conflicts had ceased, waiting to hear back from the crown on his decision in Harrenhal, and tried to avoid having further conflicts between the Blackwoods and the Brackens. Royce Baratheon had been killed. While to many it was believed that it had been an accident, and the Maester even declared it as such, the young, small boy, the Lord of the Stormlands, had been murdered in truth, orchestrated by Corwin Baratheon in order to win the favor of Cassandra and eventually marry her, so that he could be the Lord of Storm's End next to her Lady of Storm's End. He killed the little boy and broke the heart of the mother, Elenda Karen, who cried and screamed immediately that her son had been murdered. Any woman inheriting a castle would face resistance, and with her mother screaming and wailing that she was a tyrant and possibly responsible for the death of her own brother, she had to move quickly to silence the critics. She secured the loyalty of the Stormlands and established her authority before any rival could challenge her. She was then eventually taken to wife by Corwin, who had planned the entire thing from the start. Cassandra, while the Lady of Storm's End, did not take a step back from ruling when she married Corwin. Many believed that she would be forced to take a step back when Corwin became the Lord of Storm's End, but it was nothing of the sorts. The lady had no intentions of being overshadowed. She stood proudly and tall at the forefront, and any issues that came she took head on, and any criticisms were silenced eventually by the conflict with Dorne, after she heard that the Swans had suffered a casualty in King's Landing and to the Dornish. It became a moment where it could no longer be unanswered, and Cassandra made a plan to strike at the castles of Dorne, to strike at Castle Will itself, a castle belonging to the violent Dornish family of House Will, right on the doorstep of their lands. They needed to be defeated, and Cassandra needed a victory that would unite the people of the Stormlands underneath her, to gain the respect of these lords who viewed her as just some woman who came to power after the death of her young baby brother. Her forces marched into Dorne and did battle with the Ironwoods and the Wills and defeated them, while the Baratheons, Swans, and Dundarians all fought against them. Over and over, the Stormlands was victorious as they held off attacks that were trying to break the siege of Castle Will, but eventually the Wills were forced to surrender as they ran out of food and they were starving to death. They took the entire Will family captive. They then returned the Wills to Storm's End and placed them under house arrest, and Cassandra held them captive and used them as bargaining chips as she attempted to make a deal with Dorne for peace. Ariandra would need some time to decide how to respond to the Stormlands, who sacked Castle Will. This was no longer a simple raid. Instead, the Dornishmen sent raiders across the border into the Caron lands, and they also sent assassins across the border into the Stormlands that targeted lords, children, and families, and they slayed in the darkness with daggers, snakes, and poisons. The young Tyrell Lord continued training, preparing himself for the responsibilities that would eventually come with ruling Highgarden. Lady Gensia Fossaway remained as the regent of Highgarden from the time of the dance all the way until now. The Reach was not removed from the conflicts of the realm due to Dorne and Lord Fossaway sending men and his knights to the Westerlands in order to try and save Joanne Lannister, his wife. The Fossaways fought in the conflict, but Joanne still left with Ulrich Dane and became Ulrich Dane's wife despite already being married to a Fossaway. Dornish raids threatened the southern borders as House Tarly was forced to respond to the attacks of House Blackmon. Alyn Tarly is one of the greatest fighters in all of Westeros, besides the newly arrived Sandok the Shadow, who had accompanied Viserys and his wife back to Westeros. He did battle with the Dornish, and even though his forces had been defeated, the Lord killed many. Lionel Hightower hosted Alan Valaryon when he came to Oldtown, and he was still in a secret relationship with his stepmother, Lady Samantha Tarly. The Hightowers, having been defeated in the dance, remained in Oldtown and focused on their own problems and themselves. Lionel Hightower was dealing with the Faith's objections to his relationships with his stepmother, and instead of trying to look for further problems outside of Oldtown, they kept to themselves. Thaddeus Rowan made himself more present in King's Landing, desiring to undermine Unwin Peak and desiring to replace him as Hand of the King, making political moves and aiming to eventually break apart the Regency and the control Unwin had. Even though Unwin had received victory after victory after victory, Thaddeus Rowan could see the cracks, and he was looking to exploit it. By the end of Session 1, King Aegon III had chosen his queen. Miriel Peak sat beside him, and Lord Unwin Peak has had numerous victories in this campaign so far. Prince Viserys has returned from Lys after being discovered by the Rogares, and the king's last surviving brother is now part of House Targaryen. Alan Valaryon has become one of the most celebrated men in all of Westeros. After the defeat of the Tyroshi fleet, he traveled across the ocean, rescued Viserys, and helped reclaim Fair Isle. He is a man of great renown and respect now in the campaign. The Westerlands managed to take revenge against the Iron Islands. Isambard Aron, the unlikely heir, is now the Lord Paramount of the Vale and is allied with the very powerful Unwin Peak. Aegon III has a cat. That's very interesting as well. This campaign is taking place on the PDX RP server. The link is in the description. I'm going to be doing my best each week to put out videos of this campaign, and I'll be hopefully wrapping up the Bronze and Iron campaign eventually. I got caught up with things IRL, so that campaign slipped behind. Hopefully I don't slip behind on this one. This campaign is happening right now. When I'm recording this audio, Session 2 already happened. We're going into Session 3. So yeah, come and play on the server. It's really fun. We have a bunch of cool storylines happening. If I included all of the storylines, this video would be 3 hours long, so I can't do that. This first video is pretty long because it has a lot of pre-Diplo stuff that was going on. The second video might be long too, who knows. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Go ahead and like and subscribe. Come play with us and have fun. Yeah. Alright, I hope all of you guys have a good day, guys and gals.